with. She had
Okay,
why?
I'm going to call the regular city Prescott Council meeting to order. It's Monday, February 27th, 6 o'clock. Do roll call. Tom?
Here.
John?
Here.
Pat?
Here.
Maureen?
Here.
Bailey?
Here.
And Dar is excused tonight. So everybody stand, say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is public comments. The council will now receive public comments on any issue related to agenda items. Limited discussion by council may take place. Hearing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Library board meeting minutes for January 19th, Personnel Committee minutes February 13th, Council Workshop February 13th, Council meeting minutes February 13th, Parks and Public Works Committee February 20th, Resolution 14-23 approving the expenditure of $134,574 from the City of Prescott Capital Fund for the final payment of a Freightliner M2106 fire tanker truck.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Now, we're going to do a roll call on that. Tom?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Pat?
Aye.
Maureen?
Aye.
Bailey?
Aye.
Okay, motion approved. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is standing committees. Planning Commission, next meeting is Monday, March 6th at 6 o'clock. Parks and Public Works, committee report. Bailey, you want to take
Yep.
that?
So at our meeting this last Monday, we had the DOT present discussing the 35 and 10 project and the 29 project as well. We had Cedar Corp propose the plans that we had for the trail that we would like to see, and they're gonna take that back and review it. Regardless, they are gonna move forward with that project, so if we are not able to align on potential options for widening it to a multi-use trail, we will more than likely proceed with what they have proposed for the sidewalk at least. And then also discussed the 29, so the sidewalk going by Patax. And then additionally, we talked about the Knowles Nelson stewardship grant proposal and an upcoming farmer's market that might be going on at St. Croix Bluffs. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Next meeting will be Monday, March 20th at 5 o'clock. Health and Safety, next meeting Monday, March 13th at 5. Personnel, Wednesday, May 3rd at 5. The next item on the agenda is communication, new business, public comments. The city will now receive public comments on any issue not related to agenda items. Limited discussion by the council may take place. However, no action will be taken on any items, include receiving written requests or documentation and possible action at a future consideration.
I shared an email with council members about a situation with a resident and a trash can. It was brought to my attention by the resident. Since then, it was mentioned to me that that would probably be more of a Public Works issue, and was suggested that I take it to Public Works Committee, which makes sense to me. If anybody had any comments or other suggestions, I'd be open to that, but if not, that would be my plan.
She also called me.
Okay. You think that's a Public Works? Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense. And thank you for, Bailey, for recommending that.
Yep.
And learning as we go. Okay.
Any other public comments? Okay, next item on the agenda is presentation by WSP on the senior multi-family housing market study for the city of Prescott.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn it over to Jim Gromberg, who's the Economic Development Director for WSB, as part of putting this together.
I've got 700 slides, hope you guys got a couple hours. Ready? Sure. What?
I said it's Monday.
There you go. But it's not snowing up. We got that going for us. My name's, as Matt said, my name's Jim Gromberg. I lead the economic development practice for WSB, which is part of the Community Planning and Economic Development Group, which is the side of the company, the WSB, that does housing studies, does comprehensive plans, does economic development for cities, helping them grow and expand, helping them figure out where they want to go into the future. WSB, my quick little commercial. Engineering firm started about 27 years ago. About 750 employees. Our main headquarters is in Golden Valley. We're also in Texas, Colorado, and North Dakota now. So, I've been with the firm about 8 years. When I started, it was about 200 employees. Now we're up to 750. So, a lot of growth. Interesting to watch that kind of growth. But tonight we're going to talk about a housing study. We were engaged by the city to talk about where the housing is at in the community. And my presentation is generally really informal, so if you have questions, feel free to shout them out, and we'll see how we can come to a good conclusion on them. Okay? We talk about housing, we really talk about life cycle housing. And what that means is really taking people, when I was a kid just getting out of college, I was in an apartment. It wasn't a really high quality apartment. But you start at that front side and you work your way all the way through. You left mom and dad's house, moved into an apartment usually when you're young and single. Then you get married traditionally, and in some cases not, but you buy your first house, a starter home. It's usually affordable. Then you work your way up. You do step-up housing. And generally, the rule of thumb is you move into a bigger house. The smaller house you were living in is then available for that next generation who's moving out of their parents' house, moving out of their first house, their first apartment. That's the general theory. Okay. Now, as we see, and then as you continue to go up, then you get old, and where do you go? Not assisted living, but you go to senior housing, usually single level, usually a townhouse, condo type living, which is very similar to what the young single adult is in. And that's where some of the problem lies right now, as we go through this, is that young people, a lot of my staff that I hire, just out of college, they don't want to live in a house. They want to live in a townhouse where they have a homeowners association. You don't have to worry about plowing snow. You don't have to worry about mowing the lawn. You go on your vacation, you just leave the house, then you come back. Everything's still taken care of. You don't have to figure out, is the neighbor going to plow my lawn, plow my driveway, mow my grass while I'm away. And so we're seeing some competition between seniors, us old people, and younger people in vying for the same type of housing. And that's one of the things to keep in mind as we work through. So when we talk about senior housing, a lot of times, that's interchangeable. That's not just old people, but it's also young people who don't want that responsibility of having the house with the white picket fence, if you will. Okay? That's something to keep in mind. But the goal always is to have a continual turn of the life cycle of housing. Why? Because that gets people to come into the community when they're young, stay in the community throughout their life cycle, and then retire into the community. And that's what we want to see, because that creates a sense of community. If they come and then they leave right away, you don't develop that sense of community. And that's tough on communities. If you think of some of the smaller rural areas, that's what happens. They leave mom and dad's house, they go to college, they come home maybe get their first job, maybe not, but never come back. And that's a problem because the semblance of community goes away at that point. So what we really want to see is that ability to have those. And then when we talk about economic development and all those fun things, it's about job availability, and that's the other side of that coin. And we just had this conversation in St. Cloud. They were talking about, we need more housing because we need more workforce. And then we had the conversation of, that's a great idea, but if you don't have jobs and you attract a lot of people in new housing, but you don't have jobs available for them, that's a problem in and of its own right. So it's got to be a balanced approach. You got to look at all sides of that coin. And that's what makes economic development really tough. So, anyways, as we move forward, population projections. Community's growing. It's going to grow significantly, if you will. By 2027, you'll be up to 4,800 people, about a 9% increase. If you look at Pierce County and the state of Wisconsin, both of those are going to grow at a much slower rate. Okay? It's kind of weird. But what you're doing is you're attracting residents from Minnesota for the most part, and from the surrounding community because of the sense of community. That's a big chunk of that, okay? Now, what I will tell you is in 2027, if you go and count all the people in Prescott, you will not come up with 4,830 people probably. Their projections.
Could you repeat? You just said I couldn't hear you.
In 2027, when we go and count everybody in Prescott, we probably won't have 4,830 people.
I agree with that.
Again, projections are just projections. They're a snapshot in time on how people age and what the birth rate is going to be. Any of those things change, that number will change, okay? But what we can ascertain from it is that you're going to grow. And you're going to continue to grow, which is going to drive what? The need for housing. That's the reality of it, and that's really what population always tells us, okay? Now, we did create, working with the city staff, we did create a market area, and the population projections in the report actually talk about that. However, if we for this presentation, if we delved into the entire market area and all the nuances of it, we would be here until tomorrow morning and still talking about it. So, a lot of information there. Give me a call if you've got questions on how we came up with some of that information. So, it's always an option. Okay? Single home value. In Prescott, if we look at the median value, it's lower than the county and the state. It's a good thing, right? Housing's affordable. It's okay to shake your head, yes, it is a good thing. It's affordable. Majority of the housing is below below 200,000 is almost 54% of the housing is below that number. Okay? Which is significantly higher than Pierce County and the state of Wisconsin. In Pierce County, why do you think that housing is more expensive in Pierce County?
Acreage.
Bingo. That's the biggest driver there. Okay. But as we move up into those higher value houses, we have a lower percentage. Now, if we talk straight up affordability, that's a good thing. But the tough decisions you guys get to make, that means you're getting less tax value. So you have less revenue. Okay, so that's kind of the way to look at that. And again, you want a balance. What's a good balance? Well, there's no hard and fast rule, but a third is a pretty good one to use. Because again, what did we talk about in life cycle housing? We want people to move forward up each of those steps. As we get to our maximum earning potential, we want to be above that. And we hope they're in that $300,000. Okay? The reason that's a good thing is if people have a larger disposable income, what do they do with it? They eat in the restaurants. They buy things in the community. They donate money to community organizations. But overall, housing is very affordable on this matrix in the city of Prescott. Okay? Now we talk about median home value. In Prescott, we have about $194,000, same as we saw before. Our median household income, so median, not average, median, so we've taken out the outliers, it's about $97,000. Which, amazingly enough, median home value is very affordable because the annual required income, generally speaking, okay, generally speaking, for a $194,000 house is about $59,000 a year. Real general numbers. So, very affordable. Based upon this, most people can afford a house, right? So we derive from that matrix. Pierce County, less affordable, State of Wisconsin, less affordable. When we look at housing index affordability, when we compare across the country, so we look at every part of the country, Prescott's affordability index is about 168. 100 would be even, would be flat, would be equal sign. 168 means it's very, very affordable compared to housing across the country. That's a good thing. Okay? Single-family housing is very, very affordable. Okay? What's one of the problems with that?
Don't have any.
There you go. That's going to be that's going to be the next side of this. When the study was done, and it talks about it in there, houses for sale housing, single-family houses for sale, it was like 3 that were on the market at that point. Very small number. That's part of the problem, because what happens then? Remember we talked about the life cycle, that flow, that mix of housing. That's not occurring. People are staying in their houses because, arguably, there might not be houses that they can move up to. There might not be senior housing if it's an older couple wants to get out of their house. Can't move into senior housing because there isn't any. There isn't that next level. Remember we talked about there's 15% of $300,000 greater value houses move up housing. There's not a lot available. So there's a significant, that's one of the struggles that comes with it. Okay? However, while housing is really affordable, not looking good for median rent, is it? So if we look at median rent and average rent, median, everybody knows, that washes out the extremes. Average rent, that brings the, average brings in the extremes. So median rent is about $991 a month. Okay? The household median income of $39,000 is what you would need to afford that rent. Okay? And if we use the average is just another way of looking at it, average would be about $37,000. 21% of the population in the community falls below that number. What that tells us is 21% of the population in the community is housing, they're strapped by housing. In other words, they're spending a greater than 30% of their income, which would mean, based on national definitions, that housing is not affordable. Who is generally in those? Who generally rents apartments? Younger people. The very people that we want to get to move up through that life cycle of housing. So one of the issues is that rental is very expensive. It's not affordable. It's not hugely expensive, but it's not affordable. Okay, those are two different things, quite honestly. Okay? The other thing that we fall into is pent-up demand as we work through this. Total housing growth through 2027 is projected to grow about 263 units. That's how many units you would need. Okay? Now, rental demand tells us that you're going to need about 28 units. Now, here's one of the crazy things that happened in Prescott. There is a disconnect. Your vacancy rate for rental housing is about 9%, which is really, really high, which drives that rental demand number. What we'd like to see, and what you see throughout most of the market area or the county, is close to that 4 to 5%. So the city of Prescott is twice as high. Now, a couple of ways that can be caused. The units that are available for rent are apartments that I might have lived in when I was going to St. Cloud State. Don't have a lot of amenities, kind of crappy, really thin walls. People don't want to live in them. That could be part of it. Or it could be that the apartments are too nice. So they're too high up on that end, remember, about to the 944, that median rent, that they might be up there. And so as a younger person, I can't afford it. So they stay vacant.
What is the majority, so between our rental stuff, so we have apartment buildings, and then we have a lot of single-family homes that are for rent, the whole house. What is the difference between those?
Yeah, when we look at rental, we look at, in this study, we only looked at units that were a fourplex or greater. We didn't get into single-family rental homes.
Ooh, we have quite a few of those.
Yeah, and part of what, and this will get back into some of the other conversation. In the report, it does talk a little bit about rental houses,
Hey, Jim,
because you can't track it.
sorry, the mic's not picking you up when you're over.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. It does talk a little bit about that, but that's one of the things to look at, because what happens there is cities don't always track that. And that's one of the things, for a variety of reasons. But that's one of the ways that you do have to look at that single-family housing basis ownership versus rental. And there is a table in the report that talks about it. We didn't break it out here. But that affects that housing growth, what you start to look at. And the question becomes, quite honestly, on the rental houses, are there ways that you can encourage those to become owner-occupied? Because one of the things that we do know, owner-occupied houses that are owned by, somebody who lives in it, owns it, they take better care of it. There's a better sense of community. Now, what we are seeing, and this is one of the other things to think about as we move forward, is Airbnbs is a good example, is that how does the city control short-term rentals, but also long-term rentals? Is it a good thing? And becomes the policy, overriding policy thing. Because what we're starting to see in a lot of communities is that I come in, I've got money, I want to invest in real estate, so I buy houses and I just rent them. Okay, it works, but how does that work for the community? Remember, what we know is that people who own something have skin in the game, so to speak, and take better care of it. Amazing how that works. Just drive through St. Cloud on the south side. I was there today. Look at the rental housing that college students live in. They don't take good care of it.
I would agree to disagree a little bit with that, just because I'm in one and I take much better care of it, I guess, or not much better care, and I know, Maureen, you were in a rental for quite a while and took really well care of it, so, I
There
mean, I don't
are-
wanna just come out there with that statement.
Yeah, there are exceptions,
Yeah,
but generally, overall, again, we're looking at the greater, just the entire population. Generally, people, they don't take as good a care of it. And it's not a dig. The reality is I don't have the connection. Now, some of us do, because we grew up slightly different, and we understand taking care of something. But that's not always the case. And that's one of the things that you have to, as a city, and as you start looking at zoning and all those fun things, you start to have to say, okay, how are we going to take that into consideration? Do we, and this is going to go down, we're down a rabbit hole, but do we sit down and say, okay, we need housing inspection for rentals because we want to be safe? Do we need to do that?
is it economically feasible from our city standpoint? No.
That's part of the policy discussion.
Yeah.
We're not gonna get into that conversation tonight. We're not-
I was just making
Yeah.
the statement because I don't want people to think that that's how we feel about how our renters treat these houses, because that's.
Oh, yeah.
We obviously have some that are problems, but I don't want to just blatantly just come out here and say in this forum here that that's the case, because it's not always the case.
It is not always the case,
No.
but when we look at, again, we look at overlying just very glaring generalities. But
I'm
that's
sure
one
there's
of,
statistics somewhere that support that, so I'm not trying to, I just wanted to say that for this
Oh, no,
audience.
no, that's good.
Correct. Yep.
it's really part of the conversation. And it comes back to that policy discussion of, and rental units are the same way when we talk about, traditional rental apartment type complexes. Do you have inspections? Well, I'm not advocating for or against it, but it's one of those things that, eventually becomes a policy discussion. And I will tell you, Matt and Carter are really hoping you don't, because that's a lot of work and it eats up unbelievable time. But how do you get your arms around it? Short-term rentals, same deal. In essence, you're operating a business. If we look at what zoning says, you can't have a home business unless you have certain things. An Airbnb would be operating a business out of your house. So there's some of those things that we're starting to see fundamental changes. And as we move forward, some of this will change.
Do you see, as long as we're on this topic, do you see any proportional increase in short-term rentals versus long-term rentals with the increase in Airbnb and VRBO in communities where there is a tourism attraction?
In this study, we won't, we don't dive into it. But what I can, for empirical data, I can tell you, yes, that occurs an awful lot. And I know a lot of cities, the Duluths of the world, any city, Prescott's going to be one too, quite honestly. Any city that has a reason for people to go there, if you're, South Padre, wherever, you're going to start to see that because people are starting to look at it as another stream of income and an investment. And as we start to do that, and that's that becomes a positive. I have friends who, they have a house and they have a spare bedroom because Johnny moved out, and they literally act as a hotel sometimes and rent that out as an Airbnb, and then, have a little breakfast and that whole thing, which is a whole nother conversation. Quite honestly, I'm never going to do that, but, it is becoming one of those things, and cities will need to look at their zoning and how do they handle it, how do they move forward with it. But that will be one of the big issues. And I think there'll be some other things that as we move forward, that we'll start to see. So we're got a lot of demand. Now you figure over that 5 years, that's, simple math again, because I'm a simpleton. You're looking at roughly 50 units, new units a year. So 15 building permits, okay? That's a lot of building permits. That is going to tax some of your other things. And then the other question then becomes, if you need housing growth, we'll just look at single family. You need 235 units. How many vacant lots do you have in the community? Probably not 235. Where are they going to go?
In most property.
Because that's then becomes that next side of that question.
Yeah, it's a planned development that we have. I don't know if it's 263 units when it's finally done,
But I think that initial first home buyer can't afford those properties.
I think most people
Well-
aren't gonna be able to afford shit because of
Yeah.
interest rates.
Hmm?
I don't think a lot of people are gonna be able to afford a whole lot with interest rates.
Well, and that becomes the next side of that. We talk about that life cycle. Is are they affordable? What is affordability? How do we get there? How do we have a balance? And those are all questions, as we start looking, as we start moving forward, we start seeing these things, and those are the tough questions to ask. There are no easy answers. Housing is not easy to solve because there are so many variables. In 2027, will we still want what we want today in a house? Most of us grew up in a 1260 Rambler. Kitchen was separated from the rest of the house. Clearly, that's not a positive anymore. We'd look at that and go, really want that kitchen, kind of a family area. You had the living room, which you had the furniture that nobody sat on because it was only for important people. That was my family. Furniture never got used. We moved out and never sat on the couch. So there's a lot of those things of what is housing going to look like? What are those amenities that people want? So that's really where you start to sit down and say, okay, those are the tough policy decisions. Okay, they aren't going to get easy. Okay, that's a high level of a bunch of the data. There's tons of data in there. Like I said, if you have questions, more than happy to talk to you later about them. But a lot of data, very dense on that, on the comparison of the market areas. So first recommendation, rental availability. This is back to the question about Airbnbs, rental homes. How do you review the zoning ordinance and your map, your land use map? And where rental housing, in this case multifamily, the traditional rental housing, where can it go? How can it go there? Does it work? Does the infrastructure support it? All of those things start to come in play. Okay. Single family rentals, that's a whole nother side of the conversation. Okay. And again, it's not to say one is bad, one is good, that's not really what the case is. Here's the things that we need to look at and how we have to start to build a plan to make sure that there's housing available. Senior housing. In this case, how do we encourage senior housing? Do we look at financial incentives to help encourage it? so that you can continue to have that flow, that mix of housing through the life cycle. Again, think back to the first recommendation, you also have to have the area, the correct zoning for it, allows that level of density. Okay? Development of housing areas. Where are we going to put housing? Now, we have one subdivision, but do we have to have others? Do we need to have others? What type of housing should be in them? What type of housing should we encourage? Should it be a mix? All of these conversations. And traditionally, you're landlocked. There's not a lot of vacant spots in Prescott. Now, we can hope for a volcano, so we get more land. That's probably not going to happen. And that was directed at Marine from being in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to be looking at annexation. Are there ways that you can work with the surrounding townships on the expansion of the city? And do you want to do that? That's the other side of it. That's a whole other conversation. And again, this study and in this conversation, telling you what the study says, is not advocating any specific action. Okay? I'm not saying one's good or bad. These are policy decisions that the city will have to figure out and work on. Okay?
If you do annexations, then you're gonna have to look at your infrastructure. Can your existing sewage treatment plant, you have to drill another well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
Lift stations, all that.
All that kind of stuff, and that has to be built into this thought process. And that's where we get back to that. These policy decisions and these future, they're complex and they're difficult.
Yep.
Infrastructure is one of the biggest ones. Where we sit down, and not only that, okay, the city grows. What does that do to the school? Does it help? There's all these other little nuances that start to come into play. And so, again, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I'm kind of telling you what we're finding from the study.
Right.
Okay. Partnership and development. What we traditionally find, and we're working with the community, Litchfield in Minnesota, they've actually set up a nonprofit because they need housing. And the nonprofit is sitting down saying, okay, we're going to raise funds from well-off companies in the community and well-off people in the community that are members of the community. And we're going to create a housing fund to help encourage the development of housing. But that might also be encourage the rehabilitation of older houses. Because as you go through the report, you'll see that a lot of your housing is fairly old. Old houses have one thing that they all share in common. They need updating usually. They need rehabilitation. Things go wrong. Things wear out. We live in a climate that is tough on housing, honestly. Okay? So the development of partnerships. Looking, for different groups. And this can be grants. Some of those partnerships might be with the state of Wisconsin on small cities grants through their HUD programs. There might be a variety of different things. But it's one of the things to kind of spread. We talked about infrastructure and the cost of that. That's one way you can help pay for infrastructure. Just use other people's money. Spending other people's money is a lot more fun than spending your own. Cost of development review. One of the things that we did here in the interviews is that it is cost. Prescott is perceived as having high costs of development. Again, I'm not saying yes, I'm not saying no. What I am saying is that, that's something to look at. And one of the ways to look at that is to sit down and say, okay, if it costs $1 to develop a house in Prescott, and it costs $1.50 to develop a house in Hastings, that might be a marketing ploy or a marketing opportunity to generate greater housing growth, okay? But look at what the costs are and understand. There are costs associated with, and people need to pay for what it costs to do development. But are you equal, are you high, are you medium, are you low, okay? That's one of the things that, and that's really something that we encourage everybody to do, okay? Pretty easy. Development of affordable housing. as we talked about the rental housing, right now your housing is fairly affordable. We look at a standard family. But what we're seeing is a lot of that affordable housing is fairly old housing. That might have some more expensive issues into the future. Rental housing is fairly expensive for most people. So the development of affordable housing. And what is affordable housing? We're not talking about Section 8, the old Section 8 type housing. We're just talking about if somebody has a job that they make $20 an hour at, so roughly 40 grand a year, can they afford a house? Can they afford to become part of the community?
What would you say our window is that we want to target them for affordable housing based on our median income?
I think if you're around that 200 to 250, you're pretty, again, remember when we float back and we look at median income for households and what the cost of a household is, or cost of a house is, we're 194 and we said, about a $59,000, salary to afford that house. So that's really what you're going to look at. Is like if you're at $200,000 and you're roughly at $60,000 a year. Okay, so that would be if you have two people working in the household, they're each making $20 an hour. That's roughly 80,000, roughly ballpark numbers. Okay, it's about $80,000 a year, so that would be affordable at that point. It would not be above that 30% number that we kind of look for.
Does that include, did our property tax go into any consideration, like what are property taxes on top of what that affordable housing would be?
No, what that looks at is just what the value of the home is. Okay, so
then we'd have to be with property tax, including that.
what a bank would traditionally do, and what we kind of do is we say, if I rolled in and I said, hey, bank, I want to buy this house, how much money do I need to make? And they will, say, okay, you got about, to afford the house, you need to be X. There's going to be other costs, and they've actually built that into that formula, so that there'll be, if your taxes are, deep haven type taxes, then that's not going to be affordable. But they really look at what is a traditional amount of taxes that's going to be paid. So that's really kind of how that starts to get in there.
I get that part. I'm just trying to say, like, when we have developers come to us and we're saying, okay, we want your houses to be in 200 to 250 range, but we know that based on our property taxes of like houses is going to up that to, what would you say, Matt? Take a number of like an average for 250. What are we saying?
For a year?
Yeah.
We're at 250,
Ballpark.
6,000 to 7,000?
That's quite a bit compared to our neighbors next door. So that's where I'm trying to think of that. When we're having these conversations, yes, your banker is telling you that, but at the same point, this group needs to be aware of that because you can bring in 250, but that's not going to make it affordable.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And you remember we talked about costs?
Yeah.
And that's one of those costs that, we're specifically talking about development, but that's also taxes.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I understand when you're saying 250, that what that means.
That
so
doesn't-
we understand that.
And if you're at, we'll just say 6,000 because I can do that math in my head because I'm kind of simple. So if it's 6,000, that's $500 a month.
That's a chunk of change for a lot of people.
And so if you start to look at it that way, now, let's go back to what is affordable. That affordability number goes down significantly. Okay. And that's one of the things, then that comes back to that policy conversation. How do we make it more efficient? Are there ways to make it more efficient? And there are no easy solutions, trust me. If there were easy solutions, we'd all do them, we'd all be really, really rich. But there are not. Okay. But that's one of the conversations, is when we talk about that policy idea. Taxes are a direct effect of that. And I'm not arguing one way or the other. On
No, I'm just trying to make sure I understand kind of what you've presented, what's in here, and then what we actually need to take from that and do something with.
Yeah, and taxes are one of those things that you've got to build into there. Your water and sewer, your utility costs, another thing you got to build in there. Because, if that adds, in my case, in the city of Ramsey, my utility bill is about $150 a month for water and sewer. Well, that's a big chunk on a, if my mortgage payment is $1,500, My taxes add another 500, and now I get another 200, I'm up at 2,200 bucks. That's a big number. And that's part of working, I mean, and that's why when I come back to it and I say there's no easy solutions. It takes, and it is going to be a lot of work to fix the solutions. Now you can sit back and say, we're going to let the market just drive it. And they build, we get houses built, we get houses built, if we don't, we don't. A very laissez-faire attitude, that's not going to solve the problem. And it's going to be detrimental to the community in the long run, because you're going to lose residents at that point. And what you really want to do is remember the population growth. We want to see that continue to grow. Why? Because it's a sense of community. We're all going to, I got bad news for us all. We're going to get old. And we know where that goes. I know, some of us are. It's terrible. But we know where that ends. And we want the community to continue to grow and be successful and vibrant. And that's where that's why all these things are really tough conversations. Okay.
Okay. I have a question about
Sure.
what is your definition of workforce housing?
Well, when we, again, very big picture, okay? If the average pay in the community is, let's say, $20 an hour, so it's $40,000 a year, that that salary would be able to afford housing.
Okay.
One of the struggles that we run into, we don't, obviously me not personally, but that we run into when we talk about housing and workforce housing, is that a lot of times you can have a fairly good job and not be able to afford housing. There was a development going on in Egan in Minnesota, and they were developing the area. And the mayor came out and they said, we want to build workforce housing, multifamily workforce housing there. And the mayor came out and said, we don't need any workforce housing. We want to put in, single family lots, half acre, that'll generate more revenue. So somebody on the council said, well, is that true? And so they went out and they did a study. Sure enough, workforce housing that they were proposing would generate more in taxes, significantly more than dividing up the farm that they wanted to divide up into single family housing. The mayor then went down the road, and I'm not picking on mayors, but he was the mayor at that point. And he said, wow, we don't have any need for it. All of our people can afford housing in this community. We don't need to do that. And the company, the group that was going to do the development, they came back and they said, well, not really. Here's a list. All the people on the waiting list for affordable housing, workforce housing. And the mayor goes, wow, who's on that list? And the mayor's son came up to him very quietly and said, I'm on the list. Mayor changed his way. They built workforce housing. So what is workforce housing? Hard to say, but that's generally what you look at is, what's a general wage rate? So if you have a lot of companies that pay $20 an hour, $40,000, you just work it, you just extrapolate it out from there. But it is one of the things, and there's only certain things that you can do to affect the cost of housing. Make it cheaper to build. That's one, that's probably really the only way. Make it cheaper to develop them. Figure out other programs that you can help assist residents in affording housing. So there are some things to do, but it's, workforce is really a community by community deal. But to look at, if you have a lot of service industries, workforce housing is going to be affordable workforce housing is going to be really tough. If you look at communities, that have a lot of restaurants or, service type stuff going on, maybe a lot of tourist type stuff, it's very difficult to afford that workforce housing. And that's where you start to look at multifamily and how do we make multifamily type housing more affordable. But like I said, there's, the report delves deep into the weeds of data. If you've got questions, I'm more than happy to talk about where it came from and how it got there. But the reality is that, they've got some great things going on, but there are some hiccups coming into the future for the city of Prescott. And that's me. Give me a call if you got a question. More than happy to try and help you figure out the answer. Not always going to have the answers. Again, a lot of data is based upon, overall averages and medians, and sometimes it changes. As we talked about the rental, taking care of rental, some people do a really good job, other people don't. Some of it's just personality and how we were raised. So, any other questions? I bored you to sleep?
Now, you had a lot of good information, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, like I said,
I've got a couple of,
okay.
there's some holes in the logic that I see.
Okay.
And one of them is your 9% rental vacancy rate for our rentals. Could it be that the people that would be normally coming into the community and buying homes are looking right across the river where there's extremely large national builders building large quantities of affordably priced entry-level homes in Cottage Grove, all across Point Douglas. That's one of the things. So
That is
they're
one of the things-
transitioning over there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, that is one of the areas, that, really comes down to the conversation, is what does that market area tell us? But if we look at the median value, and it's in the report, if you look at Hastings, I think is one of the communities, the median value is different. It's not lower. But that's one of the questions, is it cheaper? One, how do you attract national developers? If that's a way to get a cheaper building of a house, okay, so we make
And
that-
another one is the fundamental difference in the property tax schedules between Minnesota and Wisconsin. I know that because I moved from a comparable home in Minnesota to Wisconsin, and my property taxes doubled.
Okay.
And that formula hasn't changed. And it's not gonna change because primarily, western Wisconsin is seen as the frontier in Madison. And we live with that. And one of the reasons I've rationalized my property taxes over the years is because of the relative placid, safe community that we have here.
What you get for your taxes.
Yes. And so I go, okay, I'm paying it. I'm okay with it.
It's an acceptable expense for you and your values. And that's one of the things, anytime you have a border community, that's one of the struggles that you have. What is the other state doing? And how do you solve that? And again, if you and I had that answer, we'd be really, really
Maybe we
wealthy.
need a lobbyist like you in Madison.
Well, probably not me. I just irritate people, trust me.
You can send me.
But I mean, that's part of when we look at
You can
this.
send me. I'll do
Oh,
us
boy.
proud.
All right, any other questions for him? All right, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next item on the agenda is Pierce County Economic Development Corporation Executive Director Joe Folsom, PCEDC overview. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you this evening. What I really want, the primary thing I want to do is let you know about the services that we provide as a nonprofit organization serving Pierce County and fostering economic development and community development within the county. I really appreciated this conversation on housing. It brings me back to some points in my former career when I spent about 16 years, actually it's 28 years with Farmers Home Administration Rural Development Minnesota, 16 of it doing multifamily housing stuff in east central Minnesota. So the stuff on multifamily and housing, and I also worked as a loan officer for a bank for a while, so originating home loans. I can relate to all of that kind of stuff. But what I wanted to share with you this evening are the services we provide. And what I really want to tell you is I'm a connector and a resource for you. I've got a very diverse background. It's primarily founded on small business, but it's also got a lot of rural economic development background to it. In my previous career, I spent a lot of time working with communities on these kinds of issues, financing community infrastructure, housing, working on just about any type of rural community issue. Excuse me. And so when we get into conversations on workforce housing, that's a conversation that I'm deeply ingrained in right now. I'm actually working with the village of Ellsworth on that very topic, and also with Momentum West. So I'd be happy to come here to work with you and help you with that particular piece of the conversation. Also, if you have a small business or an existing business that has challenges, those are opportunities for me. I spent 10 years of my career managing the Small Business Administration's Iowa operations. So if you have a business, an entrepreneur that's starting a business, needs some help with the business plan, reach out to me. I was working with Israel, formerly with Friends of the Freedom Park earlier this summer on some similar stuff. And it could even be a large business. I just this last month met with one of your larger manufacturers in town. I came back out of that conversation with 3 tasks, all of which I could help that particular business with, primarily because of the ability to help identify the issues, make connections to resources to help get things accomplished in that respect. The EDC is focused primarily on small business. We've been really spending a lot of time on broadband in the county over the last couple of years, but our focus has really shifted a lot to working on workforce housing, childcare, and those types of issues. So we're deeply involved in those particular topics. One area that we've spent quite a bit of time on in the last 4 years has actually been the tourism piece. It started about 4 years ago when we worked with UW La Crosse and did a branding study for tourism in Pierce County using some Department of Tourism GEM grant funds. We followed that up with another grant that we got from Department of Tourism. I think it's 2 years ago. We closed that one out this last year, where we actually launched some tourism-related activities. We created Explore the Back Roads of Pierce County website, launched a social and electronic media campaign. And so we're working on those particular initiatives. But again, like I said, we're a nonprofit organization, so we're really dependent upon communities like you, businesses, and the county for that support in order to be able to execute on the programs and activities that we do engage in. So part of my request to you is if you can help us with any of that, particularly as it relates to the tourism, I really would welcome that opportunity. And if you've got any questions of me, I'm open to that. And like I said, I really look forward to working with you and your community.
Anybody have any questions for him?
I was gonna mention too, you mentioned making the trip to Madison. We actually worked with our counterparts in St. Croix and Polk County and did a legislative day earlier this month. And what you'll find in that pamphlet is a list of the agenda items that we took to conversations with our state legislators.
Perfect.
I think it'd be great to connect with you on a lot of the trail projects that we have coming up, so I'll chat with staff and see what a good time would be to interact on that.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is Resolution 15-23, adopting the City of Prescott Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan 2023 through 2028.
So we're pursuing a grant called the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Funds, and that's for the McGee Park renovation project. And as part of that, we have to have the renovation project listed in our comprehensive outdoor recreation plan. So we decided, since we're going to have to update that, we might as well update as much as we can. So we decided to update the recommendations for park amenities as well from our parks facilities tour that we did on October 17th, 2022. So those are listed in the memo, as well as we added a description of the McGee Park renovation project within the corp and the concept plan for the project. And then we updated all the reference text and connective text throughout. If there are any questions on any of the updates at all?
I think you guys did a great job, and we reviewed it at Parks before we combined the committees. So I would make the motion to approve Resolution 15-23, adopting the City of Prescott Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan, 2023 to 28.
I'll second it.
I have a couple of questions. So the city will no longer have a volleyball court then,
It'll be a pickleball court.
instead?
Yep.
Okay,
Right now, it's a kitty litter box.
yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of gross.
And then, are we still aiming for a dog park somewhere, or is
I was
that
hoping that we
gone
could
now?
well, McGee Park I don't think is the right place, but we had talked about some of those properties that we own outside of town where it
Yeah.
might be a better place, because
Yeah.
then at least noise can be controlled and there's less people around, so
Yeah.
I don't think it's off the table. We just have had a lot of things on our plate right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and my last question is, the picnic area at the north end of the Prescott City Beach, is that what is on the upside, just to the north of the changing rooms, or is that someplace down on the beach level?
So that one I don't
Yeah.
think actually ever got fully constructed. It was a recommendation in the court, but I don't believe
Oh.
it ever got fully fleshed
Yeah.
out. as a
Okay.
Not a lot of
project
great
item.
space for it there.
Okay, yeah, I think that was all of my questions. Thanks.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Are there any other discussion on the motion?
You're so good.
Yeah.
Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the next item on the agenda is Resolution 16-23, establishing a Parks Improvement Fund for the city of Prescott.
Thank you, Mayor. So at our last workshop, or last week, or a couple weeks ago, I apologize, at our workshop, we discussed looking into establishing a Parks Improvement Fund. Specifically, as we've already talked about, we have a number of requests for parks and capital fund improvements that we are short in terms of funds or don't have a funding source to begin with. So one of the things we looked at is how could we save at least a little bit of money each year and start looking to do that. So the Parks Improvement Fund, if it was established tonight, what we'd begin to do is if we had every year, we budget parks escrow funds. If we had leftover funds at the end of each year, we'd by resolution have those passed over to the Parks Improvement Fund. Additionally, we have a fee in lieu of park dedication that we collect on any land that is developed, and we collect that. It's about $750 an acre for residential and $1,500 per acre for a commercial and industrial. So as we would collect those, we put that into the fund. And then finally, per the Wisconsin state statutes that sets up room tax, the city is able to retain about 30%, and we don't have any limitations on how we spend those 30%. So the idea would be as we collect that room tax each quarter, we put that 30% in there as well. And then although rare, other funds could be placed in there as well. For instance, if we had sale of land or if we get specific grants that are dedicated to parks or other special revenue as we see fit. So general estimates would be anywhere between $15,000 to $45,000 each year could be put in there, just based on the first three items that is in the memo and that we discussed. So with that, the idea would be tonight to establish that fund, and then it would start showing up as a separate line item within your budget sheets as we get through each month. So with that, I'll turn it over to council for comments or questions.
Fabulous idea. I would like to approve Resolution 16-23, establishing a Parks Improvement Fund for the City of Prescott.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve Resolution 16-23. Are there any discussion on the motion?
I think it's a great idea.
Appreciate staff kind of coming up with this creative idea to help us put money away for the parks.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Next item on the agenda is approval of agreement with Fred Kolkman Tennis and Sports Services LLC for $13,000 for design, plans, and specs, and inspection services for 2 pickleball courts.
Yeah, so we've been researching pickleball courts, construction configuration pretty extensively. We went with Fred Kolkman out there to discuss some ideas, and he initially submitted a concrete proposal, and so we were trying to fit concrete courts in with all of our other objectives with Public Square Park as a whole. We were really struggling to get it to fit within our budget, so we decided to investigate asphalt again, weigh our options with asphalt. We decided that it could be better because of the lower upfront costs, and we can disperse our budget across Public Square Park amenities, and it'd be easier to also expand upon the pickleball courts in the future if need be. So Mr. Kolkman, he has submitted the asphalt proposal as attached in there. The proposal is $13,000 for the design and inspections, and the probable construction costs of the courts at $45,000 to $50,000. If you have any questions about the project as a whole or the proposal, we can answer them, hopefully.
Once the design comes through, the only thing I'm looking at on the contract is there's exemptions. It says no ADA access or stormwater management is included in his bid, so I would just say that if anyone can look at kind of like how the water will pitch off from there, from
Yeah.
Public Works, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we've also spoken with Greg Adams of Cedar Corporation about possible expanse of impervious surface that would be there and how to mitigate the runoff from that.
Yeah, that would be my only thing, is if we can just have somebody double check the plans to make sure we're not gonna have a water issue.
I also have a question about that they're the company that's going to do the work, the excavation and the installation, but they're also going to be the ones that inspect that work?
So he will design and inspect. He kind of serves as a project manager. I think we are still planning on actually excavating the site, and then he
Oh.
will contract out with his preferred contractors the court construction and tennis or pickleball net placement and whatnot. So
He'll put it out to bid.
yes.
So similar to what like Cedar Corporation does for us, he's gonna put out the work to bid, and then,
Okay, so the,
So he's
oh,
kinda-
I see,
he's kinda
the
PM.
we're taking on 1, 2, and 5. And the budget for the rest of the work is 45 to 50,000, so they'll do everything for 13,000 then? And then we'll be putting out to bid 45 to 50,000?
so based on our budget, we have $102,000 set aside in our current budget for this project that we went over when we established the budget. Additionally, working with the Prescott Pickleball Association, they were willing to raise $35,000 to help us split the cost of the design or the construction and design of the pickleball court. So in trying to keep our costs down, in talking with Mike at Public Works, they're able to accomplish 1, 2, and 5, which is that excavation and then geotextile fabric and the stone base and then installing the fencing. So we had a lot of conversations about trying to do the whole thing ourselves originally. Just unfortunately, based on the design and wanting to make it last, we felt it was best to go with someone who has a vast amount of experience in this company.
I have one thing I wanted to mention, and that is, as we get rolling on this, there's no bathroom facilities. So I think we should probably budget for some kind of portable restrooms at Middle Square Park, and also for after hours at Freedom Park, because a little bird has told me that they close down at 5 o'clock at Freedom Park, and all summer long people are pulling in looking for a bathroom.
They've had a bathroom, a porta potty there.
They used to, was not there last year.
We've had some.
It was there last year, wasn't it? Anyway,
I'm not sure, I guess.
We can review at Parks, if you want,
Yeah.
bathrooms.
yeah, I like the
I
idea
hate
of
to hammer
bathrooms for
the
here.
new budget that we just approved right away, but I think that would really help things out.
We're in talks for that for St. Croix Bluffs anyway, so,
Okay,
yeah. I would make a motion to approve the agreement with Fred Kolkman Tennis and Sport Services LLC for the $13,000 for design plans and specs and inspection services for the 2 pickleball courts.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion, a second to approve the $13,000 for design plan spec inspection for pickleball courts. Any discussion on the motion? All right, Bailey,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Pat,
All right,
John,
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried, thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of agreement with Cedar Corps for application for the 2023 Knowles Nelson Stewardship Grant for McGee Park improvements totaling $5,000. Matt? Carter?
I'm gonna turn over to Carter.
Yeah, yeah, so as we touched on earlier, pursuing the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Funds for the McGee Park renovation project, and Cedar Corporation has submitted the proposal to assist us in that. You can see some of their deliverables within the memo. The work is proposed to be completed at a cost of $5,000, and we were hoping to get the application submitted by the May 1st deadline.
I would make a motion to approve the agreement with Cedar Corp for the application for the 2023 Knowles Nelson Stewardship Grant for McGee Park improvements totaling $5,000 and not exceeding.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion, a second to approve the application for the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Grant to Cedar Corps for $5,000. Any discussion on the motion? Do a roll call, Tom?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Pat?
all right.
Maureen?
Aye.
Bailey?
Aye.
Okay, motion carried, thank you. Next item on the agenda is West Central Biosolids Facility Improvements, 5.5 phase cost projections.
Thank you, Mayor. I get to, after talking about all fun parks, I get to talk about sludge.
It's poop.
Yeah, you're right, it is, but I didn't want to say that.
I'll say that. It's poop.
So the wastewater treatment plant, we currently work with West Central Biosolids. So as part of that, basically our raw sludge, after it's done getting treated through our treatment plant, it ends up as raw sludge. We have a holding basin basically underneath our treatment plant that holds X amount. A truck comes about once a week, pumps that out into the truck, and then it brings it over to West Central Biosolids facility. And why that is required is per state standards, it has to meet certain requirements. So it goes through a drying and lime stabilization process. So once that's done, it's able to be used for plant nutrients, lime, organic matter, and other soil conditioner. We do this facility is done by membership, so we have ourselves, Amory, Baldwin, Ellsworth, Hudson, New Richmond, Osceola, River Falls through 2025, Robert, Somerset, and then Spring Valley. So right now, one of the issues that we're running into with that facility, or they're running into, is it's starting to age and it's starting to run out of space. So overall, they've been looking at what would a 0.5 phase, and that's what they're calling in terms of an upgrade. They have a more extensive upgrade they're looking at in subsequent years called phase 1, but the 0.5 phase initially would look at adding storage and then replacing some of the aging infrastructure such as ventilation and things like that. So right now they've put together a proposal. They've gone out for bid in terms of what the cost would be. I don't have that unfortunately in front of me right in terms of what the overall project costs, but basically they have put together what it would do to membership dues in terms of right now the city is budgeting out of their our sewer fund $121,000, and then with that it is expected once River Falls leaves in 2026 to rise to $165,000, so a little over 45 or right around $45,000 that would increase by doing the 0.5 phase. So before you tonight, Matt Holman, who is our wastewater treatment plant operator, kind of put together a little paragraph on why it really is important. I mean, essentially, we have all the cities that are listed have the smallest amount of storage. Obviously, if you know where our wastewater treatment plant's pushed right up against the river, you don't have a huge amount of area to expand. And that storage facility, that storage area underneath the plant is the smallest of the cities. So we probably could survive for about, or not, I wouldn't say survive, but we could make that storage area last for about 2 weeks before we would start running into issues in terms of needing to get it pumped and removed. So keeping the West Central Biosolids facility is very important in terms of overall that operation needs. So that decision is being brought to the all-member meeting on March 6th at 6 p.m. Everybody is invited if you have interest in attending that meeting. They do always host it in Baldwin at the Phoenix Event and Grill Center. It's going to be at 6 p.m. that day. Myself and wastewater plant operator Matt Holman will be going for sure. So I guess the question really before you tonight is, one, any issues as you see it as the rate increase, and then also any questions that you would like answered as part of that meeting.
I'm gonna plan on going, just because I have questions regarding River Falls, like with them exiting, what are they planning on doing?
So they're actually going to build their very own facility. So there's, I don't remember how many millions of dollars it's going to cost, but essentially they're creating their own West Central Biosolids facility next to their treatment plant. So they'll actually be treating it themselves and
Okay.
having that whole process.
But they're not gonna take in other people's solids, just their own.
As far as I'm aware, yeah, they're not. And I think that was really requested too by West Central Biosolids, because obviously if you start having members start to break off one or two, and they can only, I mean, they wouldn't be able to take all the members themselves.
Do you know why they have non-members?
I think to help, if they have space available, they've been willing to help with storage and taking on additional revenue. I think from what I remember, the plan always though is if for some reason it becomes to a point where they literally can't hold any more space, they would would take in from non-members before it would affect the facility.
You get a decreased rate too by a little bit. You're paying 0.41920 as a member, and a non-member's paying 0.4719.
How do you see that?
Right here. Non-member and a member. So these are all your non-members, that's the rate they're paying. This
Oh,
is
yeah,
our rate.
I see it.
So it's a little
Yeah.
cheaper.
Yeah. I just wondered why they didn't encourage these other ones to become, if they're going to continue to take in for storage these other non-members, why they don't encourage them to become members. Are non-members assessed for the cost of the increase as well?
Non-members pay a significant amount more, and they don't allow non-members to become members for the specific purpose of, once you become a member, they're dedicated to taking your
Oh, I
sludge
see.
no matter what. So the idea is that if there's not enough storage, they can actually cut off non-members from
Oh, I see.
storing.
Okay.
Would it make sense for our community to investigate more sludge storage on one of the properties that this city owns for interim or emergency use, should Western Biosolids have a glitch in their system or so on and so forth? It sounds to me like if we only have a week or two of storage capability, we're kind of placing ourselves in a bad position.
You probably have to do like container type storage that's rated for that type of biosolid because of regulatory
Yeah.
guidelines. So you'd have to basically find storage tanks to hold it till they had availability, but.
Yeah, I'm not advocating setting up a shuttle bus
Yeah.
between our facility and the only land I know that's owned by the city. But I'm just thinking maybe this is something that should be brought up and looked at in the confines of the Public Works Committee.
I think once we get the feedback from that meeting, that'll be helpful, because I have some additional questions regarding River Falls in general, like if there's a plan to try and get some of the non-members to become members, potentially to backfill,
What I was wondering.
because they have a significantly larger portion than anybody of what they're bringing in terms of like the amount of waste, so.
They're
I don't know.
22% overall.
I went to the first meeting and then I missed the second and third one, so we probably had to go back.
Any other questions? That was just like an FYI kind of thing.
Yeah, just to gather
So-
any information you want us to ask and
Okay.
let you know that the meeting's
If anybody
happening.
else is interested in going, let Matt know so they can.
I think the point is, to Bailey's point, I'd be interested in knowing, is there a plan that maybe they have that, okay, yeah, they now have 22% more space with River Falls going out. If you replace that space with some of these non-members,
Well, some of the non-members might have a biosolids facility, but they may have like excess at times where it needs to go somewhere.
Okay.
And so the only one I would maybe question is like Lake City or,
Mondovi.
Yeah.
Mondovi.
however you say that, yeah.
Mondovi.
Lake City would be the one that I would
Yeah,
say.
they're high.
Yeah, higher, but I think they have another, I know that based on their town size, they're probably producing more than that, so they're bringing it somewhere else too. They've got to be comparable to us, or
yeah,
if not more.
yeah.
But yeah, I'll plan on going with Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda, we have no closed session. We go to other business. We need to have a special meeting of the council this Wednesday, March 1st, preferably 5 o'clock. There's a glitch in our bond between
Issuance.
Ellers and the people that are accepting the bond, so we have to re-approve the resolution, and it needs to be done by Monday. So that's why we need to have a special meeting. Can everybody make Wednesday at 5?
I can.
I gotta see if I can move one thing, but TBD, I'll see if I can move it. And I'll shoot you a message, Rob.
Tom?
I have a fire commission meeting at 7.
Oh, we'll be
Should
short
be
and
done
sweet
by
and to
then.
the point. Ellers will be here to tell you why.
Okay,
I can move my meeting, Rob, so I'll be there.
is it, maybe this is the wrong place to address it, but is it anything fundamental to the agreement?
No.
Okay.
Matt?
I guess fundamental in terms of if we don't accept the change in terms of the paperwork, and they'll do a better job explaining it, but if we don't want to accept the change as is being proposed by others, it would cause us to have to go up to rebid the bond as we did before and get bids again, and it would start over, which part of the issue that we're running into is Ellers has said since we've went out to bids, interest rates have gone up again, so if we rebid it again, we would have to be exposed to higher interest rates through the bidding
No, we don't
process.
wanna do that.
Okay, is there any other business?
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.
All right.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, I remember. This group.
Yeah.
Okay,
We're
that's what I thought.
we're a member of this.